Night alert duty, serving alongside Major Jalil Zandi. Let's return to our own mission. Major Zandi, considering the truly high experience he had, stated, "Nothing might happen right now, but mark my words, as soon as the sun rises and as soon as dawn breaks, Iraqi reconnaissance aircraft will enter our skies to monitor the position of this vessel." And I, serving alongside Major Zandi, proceeded to take off. Engaging a MiG-25 and succeeding in intercepting this high-flying bird was not a simple task at all, even for the F-14. After about a minute and a few seconds, broke our lock with skillful electronic warfare techniques he performed. My first operational flight at Bushehr Air Base was a night alert duty, serving alongside Major Jalil Zandi. This was my first operational mission in a real combat. We were sitting inside the alert building, and Major Zandi was briefing me on what we needed to do if an engagement with Iraqi aircraft occurred. He conducted a complete briefing for me, as it was my first experience. This operational briefing was absolutely essential. I was a second lieutenant, and he was one of the experienced F-14 instructors. As a rookie pilot, I flew with him with a sense of peace of mind. He was briefing me, and right in the first few minutes, while he was explaining various issues, the scramble bell sounded. When they sound the scramble bell, simultaneous with the bell, 4 or 5 telephones ring at once. The first from the command post, the second from the radar station, the third from base deputy of operation, the fourth from intelligence and reconnaissance command, wanting to track our status. When the sound of these rings broke out, we ran hurriedly toward the aircraft. Although we took off in the minimum time possible because we had been notified late, we saw that right along the runway, heading in the direction we took off, adjacent to Karg Island, unfortunately, a very massive mushroom cloud was rising. At that very moment, the radar station announced that a supertanker carrying oil had unfortunately been hit and was on fire. We patrolled that sector for a few minutes because they had notified us late. The enemy Mirage had unfortunately left the area. Of course, in a war situation, this surprise happened occasionally and was unfortunately unavoidable. After we landed at the base, it was around 11 p.m. when they informed us that the fire had been contained and the blaze on the supertanker had been extinguished. Usually, after such incidents occur, they would immediately move the damaged vessel with tugboats toward the Strait of Hormuz to take it to repair centers. experience had shown that if the enemy targets an oil tanker, especially a supertanker, afterwards, 100% Iraqi reconnaissance aircraft would come to identify the vessel's new position. Consequently, when the vessel reached a suitable distance from Bushehr Air Base, so that it gained a large distance from both Bushehr and Bandar Abbas air bases, where the scramble from neither base could react in time, they would proceed to attack. Therefore, they were intensely looking for the exact position of the damaged vessel because it was practically a fixed target. When you move a damaged vessel with tugboats, your maximum speed is 2 knots. The movement speed of this vessel was so low that the enemy could, with lower cost, by dropping general-purpose bombs, either inflict more damage or sink it. The importance of reconnaissance flights and aerial photography lies in the fact that if a reconnaissance aircraft takes a good photo of a specific area, it is a prelude to subsequent precision bombing missions. At that time, it wasn't like now where we could search on Google Earth and identify anywhere in the world and zoom in on the photo to see the target precisely. Therefore, the enemy had to determine the position of the vessel that had been hit, caught fire, and lost its maneuverability. For example, a healthy supertanker has a speed of about 20 knots, but this damaged supertanker had a speed of about 2 knots. After a precise reconnaissance flight, continuous attacks would certainly be carried out against this vessel. For reconnaissance, sometimes the reconnaissance mirages themselves would come. Reconnaissance aircraft would take precise photos, and using these very photos, it would be determined that if it moves at 2 knots, where it will be 5 hours later, or where it will be 10 hours later. It wasn't just us countering enemy reconnaissance missions. Our own reconnaissance aircraft were involved in these issues as well. For example, our brave pilot, F-14 Zolfagari, because he was well known and because he had performed very valuable and successful photography flights, the enemy scrambled about 10 aircraft from the ground just to shoot down his fighter. Why? Because they knew that when an Iranian reconnaissance aircraft, the RF-4, comes for photography, numerous attacks will follow. The reverse of this case also existed. Allow me, since Colonel Zolfagari's name was mentioned, to give a brief explanation about this great man. Colonel F-14 Zolfagari was the commander of the 11th Reconnaissance Squadron and an RF-4 pilot who truly endured unique hardships during the war until he was killed. Let's return to our own mission. Major Zandi, considering the truly high experience he had, stated, "Nothing might happen right now, but mark my words, as soon as the sun rises and as soon as dawn breaks, Iraqi reconnaissance aircraft will enter our skies to monitor the position of this vessel." Do not doubt that first thing in the morning, we will definitely have an intercept mission. I mentioned before that at that time I had little experience. While we were in the alert building, we neither slept nor were we allowed to sleep. With this situation, I truly couldn't sleep for even a minute until morning. Given this warning that Major Zandi had given, saying that enemy pilots would likely come for aerial reconnaissance, I was constantly reviewing the intercept scenario in my mind. If the enemy reconnaissance aircraft comes, what should we do to counter it? At midnight, Major Zandi first coordinated with the maintenance squadron to have 2 Phoenix missiles loaded onto the fighter so that this long-range missile would be at our disposal. I asked him, why? He said, the enemy will strongly likely use a MiG-25 aircraft for reconnaissance, and to engage a MiG-25, we definitely need the Phoenix missile. Given the capabilities of the Foxbat, only the Phoenix missile was the solution. Let me mention a point regarding the price of the F-14 aircraft and the Phoenix missile. Each Tomcat, according to existing documents, was purchased for $52 million, which even now, at this price, is among the most expensive aircraft in the world. Although Grumman no longer produces it, even at today's prices, it is more expensive than all Eastern aircraft. It is even more expensive than European aircraft. The Phoenix missile, based on the cost recorded in the documents of the Iranian Air Force and the Ministry of War at that time, was priced at $500,000, meaning calculate it right now with the current dollar rate. See what could be done with the sum of $500,000. The second issue was replacing this missile, which was even more important than its cost price. Near dawn, Major Zandi's prediction and experience proved exactly right. I was standing next to the radar station phone myself when this phone rang before they sounded the scramble bell. The radar officer announced and confirmed with a specific code that a MiG-25 aircraft is coming. Because they, through communications they had with both the 5th Column and Intelligence Command, found out that the enemy aircraft was taking off from Nasiriyah Air Base or Shoyaba Air Base. The MiG-25, to reach that high altitude and very high speed, would complete a specific flight profile inside Iraqi territory. The Iraqi Air Force had the experience that to identify a vessel adjacent to Karg, they must necessarily use the MiG-25 aircraft. Since the Tomcats would certainly scramble to counter, the Foxbat could acquire the necessary photos for the operation planners with less risk of engagement. The scramble bell sounded, and I, serving alongside Major Zandi, proceeded to take off. After takeoff, the F-14 intercept process is to take the engines out of afterburner at 250 knots. The reason for this is that in afterburner, a very large amount of fuel is consumed. But in this specific mission, and to complete the Phoenix launch profile and counter the MiG-25 aircraft, the engines had to necessarily stay in afterburner. We had one profile for the Phoenix launch, and simultaneously, we had one profile for countering the MiG-25 aircraft. In this mission, we continued exactly along the runway heading of Bushehr Air Base, meaning heading 310 degrees, which was roughly toward Karg, and the very vessel that had been hit, and the enemy aircraft was naturally moving in this same direction. Our goal was to reach an altitude where we could engage the MiG-25 in the fastest time possible using maximum engine thrust. In these moments, conserving fuel was meaningless, and naturally, the highest fuel consumption was occurring. When an aircraft is coming at Mach 2.5 to 3 speed, at an altitude of 60,000 feet and above, the interceptor aircraft must definitely have at least 50,000 feet of altitude and at least Mach 1.5 speed. An aircraft coming at an altitude of about 60,000 feet with a speed of Mach 2.5 to 3, especially a reconnaissance aircraft, the MiG-25R, which is dedicated to aerial photography since it carries no external payload, no bombs or missiles. Its speed limitation was lower, and it could truly fly at that Mach 3 border. If I want to visualize Mach 3 speed for you, it is such a high speed that for detecting such an aircraft on the F-14's Doppler radar, we had hardware problems. To be more precise, we had a display problem. We ourselves, to counter this bird doing Mach 3, had to reach at least Mach 1 to 1.5. Let me explain this technically. Intercepting a MiG-25 with the most advanced interceptor in the world, the Tomcat, given its high speed, created limitations for us that we had to overcome with the experience we had in mind. If I want to explain more about this limitation, 3 times the speed of sound is so high that even the target symbol on the radar scope, instead of moving smoothly, would jump. The Tomcat radar shows the target's new position on the scope once every 8 seconds, meaning it updates the target information once every 8 seconds. This fighter's speed was so high that this symbol, instead of displacing smoothly, would jump. Even when we looked for the MiG-25 visually and the aircraft itself was rarely seen, its contrail would truly jump. It is in those moments that you can truly understand Mach 3 speed. Engaging a MiG-25 and succeeding in intercepting this high-flying bird was not a simple task at all, even for the F-14. We started the profile. When we reached an altitude of about 45,000 feet, I started searching for the target in pulse Doppler mode. With the first sweep, I got the first blip of the MiG-25. The closure rate of the 2 aircraft was so terrifying that it might not be believable. The Tomcat radar inserts the target speed next to the radar target symbol. The MiG-25 speed was so high that the gauge indicating this bird's speed had gone up to the limit. The Tomcat radar in pulse Doppler mode, in addition to speed and range, also shows the target's closure rate to the pilot. I said before that the MiG-25's closure rate was so high that regarding hardware for identifying this bird, we had to use special techniques. Finally, by whatever method it was, I acquired the MiG-25 on radar and performed a radar lock on it. With every trick at a distance of about 110 nautical miles, which is impossible for other interceptor aircraft. I stabilized the radar lock and locked on to the target. In this mission, it was the first time I succeeded in performing a radar lock on a MiG-25 aircraft at this speed and altitude. As soon as you perform a radar lock on the target, the enemy pilot receives the lock signal. We performed the radar lock on the target at a distance of 110 nautical miles. The MiG pilot, after about a minute and a few seconds that we held the radar lock on his fighter, broke our lock with skillful electronic warfare techniques he performed. On this flight, our main objective was to cancel the Iraqi MiG-25 reconnaissance mission. It was enough to prevent the enemy attack on this supertanker for 24 hours, so the tugboats could move it out of the kill box. Meaning our main mission was to create a safe space using various tactics, so the tugboats could move the supertanker out of the danger zone. After performing the radar lock on the MiG-25, this aircraft, which was among the top tier and new fighters of the Eastern Bloc and had very advanced electronic warfare systems, succeeded in breaking this lock after a minute and a half of our radar lock and destroyed our lock. We were certain that the Iraqi pilot would definitely attempt electronic warfare, and as a result, I had prepared myself for this event. To counter this action by the enemy pilot, we had to execute the ECCM tactic. ECCM stands for Electronic Counter Measure. After the Iraqi pilot succeeded in breaking our radar lock, with the counter action we took and the tactics we employed and the strange power the F-14 radar has, he could no longer break our radar lock. When the Tomcat radar is placed in ECCM mode in that era, no electronic countermeasure had any effect on it anymore. The green light turning on, we could fire the Phoenix. At midnight, Major Zandi constantly emphasized that as long as we could, we would not fire the Phoenix. His meaning was that by performing a radar lock and creating psychological warfare, the method of which he also explained fully to me, we would keep the radar lock on the target permanently as much as possible. By creating a long and continuous radar lock on the enemy fighter, the sounding of various warning noises in the enemy pilot's cockpit inflicts high stress and anxiety on him. If this happens, in all probability, the enemy pilot will desist from continuing his mission. Given the briefing Major Zandi had conducted, his plan was for the main objective to be psychological warfare. What was the psychological warfare he had in mind? Any fighter aircraft that gets locked onto displays a series of warning signs to the pilot, both in the form of red lights turning on and various sirens sounding. In the MiG-25 fighter, as we were informed, he would be notified of our radar lock both via red lights and via a siren. Imagine, a pilot has come into enemy airspace, a single-seat reconnaissance aircraft whose goal is photography, at a very high altitude which he deems relatively safe, when suddenly a radar lock is established on his fighter. This pilot, with 1,000 tricks, managed to break this lock. At this moment, I tightened the lock again such that he could no longer break it. According to the intelligence we had, when a radar lock is performed on a MiG-25, whether it is merely a lock or a launch has occurred, this aircraft's warning system produced only one type of siren sound. Meaning, when we performed a radar lock on the MiG-25, the pilot didn't know how long this was a radar lock, and when the missile was fired, imagine the Iraqi pilot didn't know if this continuous threatening tone and these red warning lights that were blinking repeatedly belonged to a radar lock or a fired missile. These two cases caused severe anxiety in the enemy pilot. By keeping a continuous radar lock on the enemy fighter, our goal was to keep both the siren sound and the red lights constantly in front of this pilot's eyes. We wanted to disrupt the Iraqi pilot's mental balance using the continuous tone and blinking lights. Major Zandi said in these very moments, "Hold the radar lock on the enemy fighter until the last moment. If he doesn't desist, we shoot." I imagine the Iraqi MiG-25 pilot was an experienced pilot. For several reasons. One, that he succeeded in breaking the radar lock of the super-advanced F-14 aircraft the first time. Second, that the Iraqi pilot was a very persistent pilot. When I performed the radar lock on his fighter the second time, and he knew he could no longer break this radar lock, and the siren sounds and red lights had lit up in the cockpit without pause, while he didn't know if a missile had been fired at him or not, he truly continued his mission courageously. Now, we had to fight a fighter with this capability and a pilot with this level of courage. Nevertheless, the strategy of Major Zandi, as far as possible, we would not fire at the enemy fighter. This not firing, while the enemy is completely placed within your firing range, was a very difficult task. Through these combat methods, we were able to preserve our strategic munitions during this long 8-year war. If we shot down the Iraqi reconnaissance aircraft, the Iraqi army would very easily replace these casualties. But if we used the Phoenix missile very generously, reacquiring this missile was truly impossible. Consequently, in using and firing the Phoenix missile, we had to be extremely cautious. With the briefing Major Zandi had done, I planned how we could thwart the enemy reconnaissance mission without using the missile. Of course, don't forget, if specific conditions arose where, as a last resort, we were forced to use the Phoenix missile, we wouldn't hesitate for a moment and would definitely use this missile against the enemy. With this mindset of employing the Phoenix missile as a last solution, and according to Major Zandi's order to cancel the mission of the enemy reconnaissance MiG-25 pilot without using the Phoenix missile as much as possible, and if we succeeded in this task, the win was ours. It is natural that if we did this without firing, we had achieved a sweeter victory. It was almost the last seconds where there was no choice but to fire the Phoenix. Don't think that we could keep the radar lock on the enemy fighter, and definitely, after re-establishing the radar lock on the target, we could keep the MiG-25 in range for a maximum of 30 to 35 seconds. I was waiting every second for Major Zandi to issue the command to fire the Phoenix missile. The green radar lock light, the continuous radar lock tone, the red fire button light that gives firing authorization, and I could fire the missile. This pilot was so persistent and experienced and knowledgeable and brave that he truly continued until the last moments. Right in the moments and seconds where there was no choice but to fire the Phoenix missile, the Iraqi pilot's psychological breakdown and aborted. Meaning, strictly from a mental standpoint, he completely fell apart and decided to return. Thus, seeing his change of course visually, the radar station also announced and said the enemy bird has changed course. We sensed the change in the enemy fighter's vector ourselves, and the radar officer announced it too. The reconnaissance mission was cancelled, the enemy aircraft returned, and the time needed to move the supertanker out of the danger zone was bought. Cancelling a MiG-25 mission, especially the reconnaissance and photography version, was a very difficult task. Because usually the MiG-25 does not consider other interceptor aircraft as its peer, and the only aircraft that had the power to counter this powerful bird was the F-14. Thank God, this mission was carried out in the best way. One point must not be forgotten is that Major Zandi's high experience was very effective in the success of this mission. Perhaps if I had been with another front-seat pilot on this mission, we wouldn't have found such daring to plan to this extent on the radar lock and the issue of psychological warfare. If we were with another pilot, perhaps we would have proceeded to fire much sooner. The F-14 aircraft has a capacity of about 15 to 16,000 pounds of internal fuel, and usually with this amount of fuel, we don't need an external fuel tank. In afterburner mode, each F-14 engine consumes 1,000 pounds of fuel per minute, meaning 2 engines, 2,000 pounds, meaning 2 engines burn the entire existing fuel, 16,000 pounds, in 8 minutes. I mentioned the fuel issue because we were forced to stay in afterburner for a long time to execute the Phoenix launch profile, and this very issue caused us to face a fuel shortage on the return leg. On the return, both left and right, low fuel quantity red lights, which blink at 1,000 pounds remaining, had turned on. Major Zandi said to declare a low fuel emergency state. We declared an emergency, relying on his experience, and with a distance of about 80 nautical miles, we head to the base. We traveled the return path very comfortably and landed at Bushehr Air Base. All F-14 pilots, whether experienced pilots or young pilots like me who had entered the arena of war, fought with attention to this very policy and thought of using our valuable munitions less. And some of these very comrades of ours became ACs with this very method. I mentioned before that this issue was something my comrades and I had defined as our main duty. We were obligated, even with our own deaths, to protect this equipment and weaponry, especially the Phoenix missile with that terrible price. Because the existence of these weapons was the result of money collected and provided as taxes from the old village woman and man and the farmer and the people. As a military man, as a pilot, as a patriot, I was obligated to use this equipment in the best way and save as much as I could. Our saving was in the form of not using munitions negligently as much as possible, especially the Phoenix missile. Imagine if we were to use our munitions very generously, we would certainly have achieved more victories. For pilots and technical specialists and other personnel who participate in performing a mission, achieving an aerial victory is a great honor. This is a reality. But we let go of achieving honor and tried to perform our mission with special tricks and tactics, preserving national assets. Ultimately, fortunately, we cancelled the MiG-25 reconnaissance mission and did not allow entry to any other reconnaissance bird until the end of daylight that day. The tugboats moved the supertanker away from the danger zone and took it near the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz was a safe area, and thank God, our mission that day was successful. On the return path to the base, we had a feeling of heartfelt satisfaction, and I saw this heartfelt satisfaction in Major Zandi's words. It is precise in my mind that at that time he was a major, the commander of the fighter wing, and had a very special status, and I was a second lieutenant newly arrived at the F-14 Tactical Squadron. On the return path, he showed his satisfaction in this way. He called me by my first name and said, "Ali Reza, good job, thank you." And this matter was very important to me.